it's me, Brianna, and you are listening to Are We Caught Up Yet? Marvel Edition. You can find us on youtube.com/SaveTheGameMedia and podcast services. If you do want to show Save the Game Media some extra love and get early access to all of our content, you can find us at patreon.com/SaveTheGameMedia. $1 tier, we have a free trial for 1 week, all of that fun stuff. Woo! Today, I'm joined by my co-host and friend, Sam. Sam, I was watching the opening, and I noticed we only have one scene left that I haven't actually seen the show that it's from. The rest of them we've seen now.
Kind of exciting. Again, like No Limits, I sit in silence whenever the intro plays, so I don't see anything. But from what I can remember, I'm pretty sure it's Moon Knight that we haven't gone to. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that one time I was like, how was the intro? And you were like, what the heck? How did you know it played? That was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
It was a crazy time.
Yeah.
How are you today, and what have you been watching?
Relatively short from me. I'm okay. Stacked as usual. I said it was back to the rat race whilst we were recording No Limits this week, or the time of recording this week. And it is indeed. Today has really started the ball rolling quite fast. So there's lots of stuff on my plate as per usual. And I have watched zilch, absolutely nothing, because I've been away on holiday. And since I've been back,
really, it's been like 3
things.
weeks since we recorded one of these. Nothing.
No, there's not really anything out that I'm interested in watching. So
it's crazy.
Yeah, I'm quite selective with any time I decide to sit down and watch something rather than do anything else.
Yeah, makes sense. You're more of a gamer.
Yeah.
Since this show has last been recorded, I've watched a lot of stuff, but it's mostly been anime. So if you want to catch up with me on anime, watch That Time We Got Reincarnated as an anime podcast, because Kyle and I talk about a lot of anime. For regular shows, we rewatched my family. Well, it was a rewatch for me, but my family hadn't seen Severance, so I finally convinced them to watch Severance, and they bugged me until we finished it. We ended up staying. We stayed up late to finish the last couple of episodes. I think we were up until like 10 or 11. I don't know, late for them. So yeah, I think. I'm trying to think if there's any other like normal shows that I've watched. I started watching Baby Reindeer, but I didn't get too far because I was distracted by my work that I was supposed to be doing. Really cracked me up the other day. My dad's girlfriend goes, "Have you seen Little Rudolph?" It's like, "Do you mean Baby Reindeer?" And she was, yeah. I couldn't stop laughing because it's like, I know what you mean, but it's like two different vibes. It was really funny. So now whenever you guys go forth and watch the show, you can say that you watched Little Rudolph. You know what I did watch, Sam? A show called Daredevil. Yeah.
Okay.
You heard of this show before?
No, not really. I think Taylor's mentioned it like once, maybe. But no, not really familiar.
You know what's going to be so funny is he's going to ask us again if we're going to watch it for the show after we've already recorded this episode. I just know it. Give him like a month. He's going to be like, did you guys ever watch Daredevil? Anyways, he's very silly. I watched Daredevil. That happened.
You did?
Well, we usually start with general thoughts here. My general thoughts on Daredevil was that it was okay. There were a lot of elements I really disliked about the show. There were some elements that I enjoyed. I think overall, I don't believe I was the audience for this show, um, which is not a bad thing, but it means that like I just didn't get along well with the show.
Hmm.
There are my general thoughts. Sam, what are your general thoughts on season 1?
Nice and brief there, very concise.
Thank you. Thank you.
I completely understand where you come from, and I think as someone who has, in a relatively short span of time, comparatively consumed a lot of mainline MCU content with high production values, and you've seen mainline MCU shows be done alongside, like what you said about it just not appealing to you in general. I think having that be your experience I can understand it painting this show as not as good in comparison. And to be clear, I don't think it is as good. But I obviously, and I think if you look it up, the general sentiment amongst most people who watch this show, sing its praises from the rooftops, Taylor included, because this came out for season 1 was 2015. This was before really the MCU exploded in the big ways of this is pre-Civil War and Infinity War and Endgame and all of those things. So we didn't have Spider-Man, we didn't have Black Panther, we didn't have a real breadth of characters. It was mainly focusing on the core, mainstay Avenger characters and not really much else outside that. So to hear that there was going to be like a Netflix show, that it was set in the MCU technically and would reference events in the MCU, but it was going to be a one-way street, that the movies weren't going to reference this show. Expectations were set that it was going to be a self-contained thing, but there would be little winks and nods for audiences if you knew what to look for. I still really like the show. I think I will admit, not necessarily that it's gotten worse over time, but I think that it hasn't aged as well as I was maybe expecting it to have aged. I still think like the main thing that the show gets praised for is the casting, and I think that is still top tier. I think Vincent D'Onofrio as Fisk, Charlie Cox as Matt, and even like Foggy and Karen, I think are all excellently portrayed. And admittedly, some have more to do than others. But again, going back, this was the first real version of any kind of grittiness that we got out of Marvel, chronologically speaking, in terms of when this released. So it was a breath of fresh air in that sense as well. And to have an episodic Marvel thing was very novel at the time. So I think inherently anybody who saw this as it was airing and was invested in Marvel, which is what you would probably be doing if you were watching this as it was airing, there's going to be like a nostalgia bias to an extent. I'm certainly not and have never been as high on it as a lot of other people have, but I still thoroughly appreciate it for what it is. But I can understand it having limited appeal in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, cool. General thoughts, check. I have my little list here of like stuff we usually talk about. I'll say I don't think I noticed the soundtrack at all. Think we just had another generic soundtrack on our hands. I could be wrong. but I did not notice the soundtrack at all.
I mean, the one thing, I don't know whether you were just about to say this. I'm sorry if I cut you off, but the one thing I would disagree on is that I think that the main theme, like the title theme for the show, is very good. Very, relatively minimalistic, but it has, again, I guess within certain circles, become regarded as one of the best superhero themes. And I would agree with it. I listened. I have various playlists on Spotify, and for like instrumental, orchestral score stuff. The title theme for Daredevil almost always slips in. I think it's relatively like, I never know how to phrase it, but like that it is synonymous with the character, I think, at this point. And again, you're coming at this first glance, having no real time to sit on it, or there'll be people that have rewatched it multiple times, and therefore the theme would automatically be ingrained more in their heads. But I would never mistake the title theme for anything other than Daredevil, which I think is something to its credit. I would admit, though, that outside of the title theme, there is essentially nothing memorable about any of the music.
I think if the title theme didn't stick out, I think that would be incredibly depressing. I think it would be like, oh man, not only is there like no soundtrack, but there's like not even the single song. But yeah, no, I will say that I do like recognize the title song. I thought it was good. Like, it's just, I don't know, just kind of.
I think it helps as well. Not that this is specifically about the music, but I think that the marriage between the music and the very stylized opening, the CGI intro where the credits play with the music, I think they go hand in hand very well and make each aspect more memorable. The marriage there. I don't think one would work nearly as well without the other, but them being put together is arguably, to some, probably the best thing about the show, which is a valid opinion to have. But
yeah. Okay. Well, got that out of the way. The show does pass the Bechdel test. Okay. So we have a lot to get through. So I'm not going to go episode by episode just because there's 13 episodes. And there's a lot to cover. So we can just kind of like open the floodgates. Anything that happens in the show is open for discussion. I did want to kind of start by asking you how you felt about the main cast. I know you said you enjoyed Vincent D'Onofrio, I think is how you say his last name. How did you feel about Deborah Ann Wool, which is Karen Page?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think both Foggy and Karen are pretty strong. I think if you, to me, you feel free to disagree. To me, the criticism levied against those characters would be less on the acting side and more on the writing, giving the characters meaningful things to do.
Yeah.
But I think,
I don't even think it's meaningful things to do. I think it's the endless cheesy dialogue that comes from the writing. But anyway,
yeah. No, I would agree. I think a part of that is they're trying to capture the essence of what Daredevil is in the comics, which is a slightly strange blend where the dynamic between Foggy and Matt, and subsequently Karen when she enters the picture, is very cheesy and quirky. And obviously there's not a love triangle because Karen doesn't really ever seemingly have feelings for Foggy, but you know what I mean. Foggy clearly has some kind of interest in Karen.
I would disagree with that.
Interesting.
I would strongly disagree with that, actually. But anyways, I would actually argue that she doesn't have feelings for Matt at all. And it would therefore not be a love triangle.
I guess we'll agree to disagree.
Anyways, that kind of shocked me a little bit. Sorry. Okay. What do I want to talk about? Okay, so we kind of start out this show with this guy, and we find out that he's doing crazy stuff. That's very simplified. I think that the first episode was done well. I think that it kind of set everything up well. I think that we kind of get an introduction to the characters. I really like that the way they introduce Karen, and that she like doesn't seem like she'll be a regular character. And then she does become a regular character. I like the way that they set up for Matt to like start doing his crazy backflips and tight pants way. So yeah, I think that like the first episode, maybe even the first couple of episodes, I think we're executed successfully. I think that like the cheesiness just wears off really quickly for me. And not to say that the show necessarily had to be gritty, but I think that they could have leaned away from like the cheesy dialogue very easily. Man, I feel like all of the interesting characters they just like kill off. I know this is kind of jumping in the show, but it's one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is how do you feel about Matt's decision to not tell Foggy what's going on? Because Foggy's argument is, well, if this was happening to me, I would have told you. And he says, like you can't know that you would have told me. And I definitely agree with that sentiment of like, there's no way that he could have ever known. Like if this role was reversed, would you have said something to your best friend or would you not have? But
yeah,
regardless, how do you feel about Matt hiding that from Foggy?
Yeah, I've heard that as a criticism. Not saying that you're saying it's a criticism, but I've heard it as a criticism. I don't really subscribe to that ideology. I think it's no different to any other, alternate identity, hidden identity thing that heroes have most of the time. And I think it's especially vital, or vital might be the wrong word, but I'll run with it for Daredevil because I would argue more so than a lot of other heroes. And as this show tries to portray, Daredevil is much more on the ground, and therefore the stakes that are inherent, whether he's dealing with Kingpin as a villain or anybody else from his roster. I don't know. I feel like there's more of a imminent danger apparent. Because if he's just in Hell's Kitchen, primarily, I feel like it's almost like I view it as like a fishbowl, right? And if Daredevil's in there and there's a real big fish like Fisk, you have less space to maneuver around. And therefore, if you are more open with that information, even to someone like confidant like Foggy, the point I'm trying to make, Matt has arguably the best hidden identity cover story thing possible, because not only does he present as a relatively not feeble man, but a very normal guy, he presents as someone who is, he's a lawyer, so he's abides by the law and he's very unassuming and whatnot. On top of that, he's blind, so he's even less of a suspect to be the culprit or to be Daredevil. And I feel like in the same way that most other heroes don't reveal their identities to those that they care about sometimes to protect them, I feel that it's just the same here. There's slightly different circumstances. like if you are in a position like Matt is, where he doesn't have superpowers necessarily outside of like enhanced hearing and things like that. I don't know. I feel the desire is probably stronger to keep those things close to your chest. The less they know, the better is always the mantra. So I feel if I'm consistent in allowing, understanding, and sometimes even liking that with other heroes, I have to be consistent and do the same here.
Okay. I would say that I in general agree. I think that like if I were to kind of put myself in that position, I just don't think that I would want to tell my friend. Because it's like when you're telling somebody something that's that serious, you're kind of opening them up, like he's saying, like you're opening them up into the danger as well, right? Because then they have information to provide.
Yep.
And that's not to say that Foggy isn't trustworthy. I think that he absolutely is, but I think that it does open him up to being in danger from other people. Which I mean he kind of is anyways, just by nature of being friends with Matt, but I think it's definitely worse. So I think that like I can kind of understand the logic from both ends of that argument of like Matt saying like I just don't think that it's like a good idea for you to be involved with this. And also like how do you explain to somebody like, hey, I'm blind, but I actually can see better than most people? Like that sounds kind of douchey, to be honest.
Yeah.
Dude, I like literally I wish that I had recorded it. I don't know how I could have like known to record it, but the episode where that like this whole argument happens and he like turns around and I was like, "Oh no, Luna." And I went, "Are you even blind?" And then he said it like 3 seconds later. I was like, this is so stupid. I didn't like that part. That whole argument was like cheesy to like literally maximum levels. But I will say that I enjoyed like the actual emotions behind the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. I actually kind of want to go back to what you were talking about with like Karen's feelings for Foggy and Matt. And kind of push back on it. So here's my thoughts. So we have what is the cute old lady's name? Elena. There we go. So we have Elena, right? Foggy and Karen go to Elena's house, right, to help her. She sets up a romantic dinner for them, right? They have that whole like romantic moment, right? Clearly, we're not arguing here about whether Foggy likes Karen or not. He clearly does. However, what I will say is that Karen talks about like she's like, yeah, he is such a nice guy. Like she's like kind of acknowledging like that kind of piece of it. And it to me, it didn't feel like, oh, he's a nice guy, like friend zone nice guy. Like it felt like she was kind of like seeing him in like a different light of like, you know what, he is actually really nice and he's kind of cute and like whatever. Like that's how I kind of interpreted like that whole interaction.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's incorrect, but I would still stand on my opinion that there is, even incredibly subtly, a draw between Karen and Matt, because I feel like, and I'm not trying to diminish anything or portray anybody as anything, or I feel like there is, let's call it a trope sometimes, where a woman who is saved by the male hero, whatever, even if the romance isn't blatantly overt, typically in media you will, at least especially in this kind of context, find that the female character is like inherently intrigued by the mystery surrounding the male hero, particularly if that male hero is withdrawn and quite reserved, which Matt is. So I feel like I understand that there certainly isn't anything, like, I would say, explicit or completely evident that would imply that there is any kind of romantic connection between the two of them. But I guess what I would rephrase my salvo to is that there is certainly a draw between the two of them, I think, that I would argue is undeniable. Certainly, well, yeah, no, I'm going to stand by that statement. I'm not going to amend it anymore. I think that gets messier. I think that, yeah.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. Like, I understand, like, the draw that you're talking about between the two characters, but I would say that, like, that draw doesn't necessarily have to lean one way, or like platonic or romantic. Like, it just is, right?
Sure.
Whereas I feel like there was, like, more explicitly, like, romantic content between, like, Foggy and Karen.
Yeah, I guess I just don't ever read it that Karen is explicitly interested in Foggy either, I guess.
I did interpret it that she was, like, they were explicitly interested in each other, but I will say that, like, I think that your, like, explanation and your thought process does make more sense at the end of the show, just because, like them being like, oh, are you gonna get back together with your ex-girlfriend, and she, like, doesn't care. That kind of flipped, like that kind of threw me like through a loop, because I was like, wait, they were, like, setting up this romance over here, but, like, all of a sudden they're not. I don't know, that one did throw me. But
well, it kind of, like, and I'm not trying to diminish Karen as a character, but not saying that this is explicitly what this series does, but I can certainly I can see from this season alone the trajectory of there may be interest between Foggy and Karen, but again, just stereotypical tropey stuff. Matt is the more mysterious, compelling hero character, and
he's also more handsome.
I've seen it. I mean, yeah.
Just
Elton
calling
is certainly
it.
not an unattractive fellow, but
No,
Charlie
he's
Cox
not
is
unattractive.
he's got like.
But yes.
Yeah, Charlie Cox is Bay.
Do I need to make a simplest for you?
Charlie Cox will be on it, absolutely. I think, yeah, like I could see the trajectory where there is an interest between the two of them, but Matt is the bigger draw, and ultimately, in whatever way this story would conclude, I could see the path where, you know, Karen cares about the both of them, but ultimately ends up with Matt, and Foggy is, you know, the normal dude that misses out on the girl kind of thing, because the hero always has to get the girl, that kind of trope. But then, you know, I'm going to preempt it. I could also easily see a path where it's the opposite, and that, you know, it looks like for such a long time that she's going to end up with Matt, and then at the end of the day, she actually realizes that who she really wants is Foggy.
Yeah,
but you know,
I get that, but they also set up, like, Claire as, like, another romantic interest, so I think it's really easy to just say, like, 1 + 1 and then 1 + 1. Like, yeah. I don't know, like, it doesn't have to be complicated, but
no, and like, also technically, I guess, like, worth raising here, just because we're talking about it, like, in the comics, Daredevil is a womanizer and sort of sleeps around a lot, so the idea that he would necessarily be tied down to one romantic interest is kind of antithetical to who he is as a character anyway.
Whoa, you guys, fresh ideas alert. A hero can't settle down with one person.
Who knew?
Never seen it done ever before.
Nope.
Seriously. Okay. Okay. what else do we want to talk about? How do you feel about the use of Wilson Fisk in this plot line? I don't know if Wilson Fisk is normally used in the comics or not for Daredevil, full disclosure. But I was just curious how you felt about the use of Fisk in this scenario.
Yeah. I think if there is one unanimous thing about this series, is that everyone says that Kingpin is probably the best bit of it, and that his casting, as I said at the top, is one of the best castings of all time. He just embodies the role. He is 1,000% believable. He is a intimidating, sort of cold-blooded presence, which is exactly what the character demands. And I like that for a decent chunk of the show, they are as reserved with him as a character as they are, because it's the same argument that people make about the shark in Jaws, right? Where the more you see the shark, the less scary it is, because you see it and you know it and you understand it and you comprehend it and you know what it can do and what it can't do. So that's why, I mean, technically, the reason that the shark isn't in Jaws as much is because the animatronic was faltering under the salty water more often than not. So they had to get creative about how they depicted it. But I think that rings true for any threat or villain or creature or monster or whatever.
Why didn't they just hire a shark?
What, you're asking the real questions. Spielberg's a cheapskate. Like,
You didn't want to pay the shark union.
Exactly. I think the same rings true for any of those things, and therefore it rings true for Fisk as well, where the more that he's just like a looming presence and threat in the background that you don't see but more feel the ramifications of on Hell's Kitchen, I feel like that does better service to the threat that he's supposed to present than him smashing a head in a car door ever would. Though I still think that scene and scenes like it are effective in showing how brutal he is. The idea that he is bigger than just a man, which is meant to be the point, that you think, why doesn't Daredevil just go in, beat the hell out of Fisk and then call it a day? It's like, well, you can't. It's not as easy as that, because the corruption is deep rooted and Fisk is in everyone's pockets, and he is more like a shadow cast over this district of the city than a person ruling it. So yeah, like, I could go on and on about how much I love Fisk. I think that the stuff that they present about his character, the little insights we see into why he is the way he is very compelling. Probably some of the most compelling stuff in the show. Yeah, I love it.
Okay. I was actually really interested, really, I guess intrigued might be a better word, that they were using Wilson Fisk, because Kingpin is a pretty big villain, specifically in Spider-Man's story, usually. So I was interested that they had pulled him out for this TV show, which is not to say that I ended up I enjoyed what they did with him, but I just was curious why they were using him for this TV show with all of the MCU stuff going on, because they clearly at this point knew we're probably going to be doing a Spider-Man film at least, right? So they kind of knew that they would that they could use this villain in other ways, but they decided to use it here.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that is kind of multifaceted. I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. Kingpin was introduced as a character as an enemy of Spider-Man, like you say, and he's quite a well-known character, whether you're talking about the Insomniac games. He's the first boss you fight in the first game.
Spider-Verse as well.
Spider-Verse, exactly. Like, he's well known, certainly nowadays, less so 10 years ago. but he's been quite prolific. But after his introduction, being a prime adversary for Spider-Man, he did then become the arch enemy for Daredevil in the comics. So his inclusion here makes sense, but also, and I think that you do raise a fair point of, well, if they knew they were doing Spider-Man films in the future, surely they'd want to save him. I think inherently, because I said it was a one-way street and the show would reference the movies, but not the other way around, I'm sure that the creators behind the show were probably still at least hoping that maybe one day that could become a two-way street, and that the character that they introduce and depict here could go across to the movies, which didn't end up happening, but they might have hoped for that at the time. And also, nitty-gritty, but I'll just very briefly say, whilst this is technically set in the MCU, the Netflix and Marvel television side of things at this time, pre-Disney Plus, was a completely separate entity to Kevin Feige and the MCU. So it was a completely different creative team overlooking it. It was Ike Perlmutter who was the lead, and he was vehemently distasteful of Kevin Feige. They hated each other. So I do feel, in a way, that whilst these like B and C tier characters, both heroes and villains, were the ones relegated to the Netflix TV shows at this time, Ike and the team there obviously wanted to make compelling television, but also wanted to kind of try and maybe give a middle finger to Kevin Feige and that team as well by taking as notable characters as possible and calling them theirs, and then it's like, haha, we got to this character first. We got to this character first. You don't get to introduce them because technically you've allowed this to be kind of canon, but also not. It's like, it's messy. And there's a lot of sort of spitting at each other back and forth going on with the Marvel TV at this time, which has obviously now been cleared up because all the Marvel television is being produced by proper Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige, and it's all on Disney Plus. So there isn't that fracture there anymore. But at the time, it was a pretty big deal if you were in this space. It was sort of the conflict was well known.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Alrighty, well, that is good to know. I will say, like, just to kind of tie it back in, just because I want to say it before I forget, I do think I liked Wilson Fisk, like as a character. I also really liked Vincent D'Onofrio's performance as Wilson Fisk. I just wanted to like double down on that before I forgot.
Yeah.
One of my biggest complaints, and this is kind of ties into my next question, one of my biggest complaints with Wilson Fisk is the way that him and Vanessa interact. It's again just a byproduct of the writing for the show being incredibly cheesy. But like, especially at that last scene where he's like, Vanessa, like the way he said it, I was like, ew. Like, it gave me such an ick. I just have a really hard time with the setup of their relationship. I like the backstory itself, but the way that it was executed, they're so cheesy. And listen, I have a pretty big sweet tooth, and this is this is too sweet for me. So I don't know. I didn't enjoy that part. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is also the setup, because I think it's interesting that they set up Vanessa. Like, she put on the ring at the end, and she's like, I don't know, she didn't say anything, but she put the ring on.
Yeah.
Kind of setting her up, I'm assuming, to be a villain for season 2 or 3. Who knows?
Who knows?
Hopefully not ever me.
I get what you mean. I don't know that I ever had a problem with it necessarily, because again, that, like you say, that goes back to the cheesy writing thing, which I seemingly, I think, just in general, probably have a thicker stomach for. But
you have to be into heroes.
all right. But also, I feel, I'm not saying that this is any point that you were making, but the show did a good enough job of convincing me why they would both be interested in each other that
Oh yeah, for sure.
I was kind of able to overlook any of those sort of slight little weird things. The way I guess I look at like that specific thing at the end where he's calling out her name and stuff, very clearly it's like Fisk has a lot of childhood trauma that has sort of shaped him the way that he is. And like in non-creepy a way as possible, I think he kind of looks to Vanessa not only as a partner, but as like a mother figure as well. Like, because I think what Vanessa does, because she is intelligent and she's competent and she's like a businesswoman and she's not afraid of what he does. She knows what he does and sort of not necessarily actively endorses it, but doesn't have a problem with it. I feel like she offers the stability that was very obviously completely devoid in his upbringing. You know, like she is that female maternal-esque figure that he can rely on. Because I kind of get the sentiment, the feeling from Fisk that realistically he probably is still just that child still. Like he, not being mean to him, but he does look like a man baby kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, he is a man baby.
And he has like temper tantrums and stuff, to put it bluntly. So I feel like there is like a mental stunting there somewhat, that he is still, the childhood trauma that he experienced has kind of like lodged him there to an extent, and why he keeps reflecting on it so much, and it seems to be so pivotal to who he is as a person. So I kind of feel, I always have the vibe that if Fisk was willing to, he would probably break down and open up to Vanessa quite often, if not all the time. You know, I feel like if Vanessa was like a therapist to him, he would be just a mess, you know? And I kind of feel like both Vanessa and Fisk knows that that's the dynamic that they have with one another. And therefore Fisk feels comfortable and probably more dependent on her than he's maybe ever felt on anyone, because of that stability.
Well,
Even just, and the reassurance mentally, I think
he relies on Wesley very, very heavily as well.
Sure, but like not in an emotional sense, you
Right.
know.
Right.
Wesley is there for the business side and to the red right hand, but for the emotion and the calming of the storm that is raging inside of him, I think Vanessa is that balm.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I think that their relationship works. I like that. I like the way they set it up. I like that the way they set up their dynamic and all of that stuff. It's just the dialogue, like what they're actually saying, that gets me.
Sure.
Oh, but what was I going to say? Something about Vanessa. Oh, you're talking about the maternal stuff. Like, I would say more than maternal. Like, I would maybe say like use the word like maybe just like a nurturing figure, because maternal feels kind of weird. But I definitely understand what you're saying. Like, especially since like his mom is kind of not gone, but like kind of slipping away. Especially since he like is now moved her to a different country.
Yeah.
And also he had just like a garbage father, so you know. I will say I enjoyed the way that they kind of tie the conversation of like what's happening with him, like, and Vanessa into like the bigger conversation that like of whether Matt should kill him, like if he has the responsibility to kill him. If it's not his responsibility, whose responsibility is it? Like, at what point have things gone too far? Stuff like that. I think I liked that like overall conversation in the show of like especially when he's like kind of talking to the priest of like, well, like I feel like I have to. And like the way that he kind of like interprets like the messaging of like, well, it like if I don't do it, who's going to? But like also gives him, like, kind of what Foggy brings up, like what gives you the right to be like judge and executioner.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's hypocritical to try and stop Fisk from being that by becoming it yourself. It's sort of, you know, a moral conundrum that's a criticism, not criticism, but like a commentary that gets brought up a lot with like Batman specifically. It's sort of, why doesn't Batman just kill the Joker? Like, the Joker is constantly causing chaos, killing innocent people. Why doesn't he kill the Joker? Because the problem would be solved then, surely. And it's like, you know, there are moral, ethical lines to cross. At, like you said, at what point do you kind of become the thing that you're trying to stop? So, because in the same way that Batman is a vigilante, Daredevil is very much the same. You know, he's not viewed as an outright hero. He's not like a savior, really. He's viewed as this kind of vigilante justice figure. And I think because of that, he is allowed more moral ambiguity in terms of the stuff that he does. But Matt wants to do good, right? And he wants people to believe in him, not only as the lawyer, but also as Daredevil, and for him to be a symbol of hope, and that people can, innocent people can look to him and feel safe. And I think by doing something like killing Fisk, you would inherently wipe the potential of that ever happening off the board. So I like the moral quandary. Anytime it shows up in any media, I love that kind of psychological turmoil that thrusts the hero characters into. So
yeah, I do enjoy that kind of questions, those kinds of questions as well. I will say, like, I think that Matt specifically, I think that what's really interesting about his character is, I think that them pointing out, like, you do actually like beating people up, like, because that's kind of like what Faki points out. He's like, it seems like you do enjoy the violence, right? So, and I can't even blame him for that, because like, if you had this, like, if you were blind but you had this like really crazy like senses, and you're like able to do all this crazy stuff, like, why wouldn't you want to revel in that? But at the same time, like, I think that that's kind of what makes it so dangerous for him to kind of go down that path, because it's like, okay, so you kill Fisk, somebody else shows up, are you going to kill them too?
Yeah,
Stuff like
where
that.
did you stop?
Because I think he does enjoy the violence, even if he doesn't want to enjoy the violence. Because I think what you're saying, like, of like, he wants to be that protector, he wants to be the person, but I think that there's like a difference between like who we want to be and who we actually are. And I think him wanting to be that protector figure is something that he's striving towards, versus who he actually is yes, he's that protector figure, but I think he also enjoys that violence piece.
Yeah.
So.
And even on top of that, not only who we want to be and who we are, but also who we have to be, you know, which I think is another tangent on top of those two things, of there is a reality of who we are and who we strive to be, but also what reality dictates that we need to be, against our will more often than not. And that is an interesting place that, again, isn't, you know, unique to Daredevil by any means, but I think it's executed quite well here. And it's a double-edged sword of anonymity, right? Like the secret identity is great because it helps him protect the ones that he loves, but it also inherently removes some degree of accountability, you know? And not that I necessarily think that Matt detaches himself from the Daredevil persona. He doesn't, you know, put on the mask and then he's not accountable for what he doesn't think he's accountable for what he does, or he doesn't, you know, consider what he does. But I think that, again, the vigilante side of things, him being viewed that way by the public, I would say, and like in conjecture, obviously, I would assume that would just naturally make the person, whilst they are doing that, more inclined to engage in that kind of behavior. You know, that if you are what the world makes you, some people say, you know, so if people keep calling you a thing, you are probably at some point down the road, sooner or later, going to end up filling that role more and more. And obviously that's a slippery slope that can snowball, that if people start seeing you as violent because you did a violent thing that was well-intentioned, that can then very, very easily slip into the, oh no, he's actually just beating the pulp out of people because it's become second nature. And like you say, he actually kind of gets enjoyment out of it. So yeah, there's a real turmoil and tension in the show. The one thing I would credit the show to, not only in terms of this, but also just in general, is, to me, it does feel like quite tense most of the time, which is nice, because I think that that's something that this kind of story needs to be, the way that it's presented. And that's inherent in like legal dramas and, you know, thriller stuff anyway, but you can do that quite poorly, and I don't think that Daredevil fails in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. Now that you pointed out that he's similar to Batman, I can't get out of the I'm Batman. Because he lowers his voice in the same way that Batman does.
Gotta make sure people can't recognize you.
So silly. I will say, I kind of want to ask you, what do you think the right answer is? Like, do you think that he should have killed Fisk? Like, I think at the end, like, it's like he was able to like catch him, but he didn't know that, like, when he like was of the mindset of like, oh, I should go kill him. He didn't know that things would work out. So do you think that like that was the right answer of like, he seems to be a really horrible person, I should kill him? Or do you think he kind of went off the deep end there for a minute?
Again, it's so interesting and compelling, and you can argue either way. The line that I always end up falling on is in the same way of like Batman and the Joker, and, you know, Daredevil and Kingpin. You could put in any two characters that are diametrically opposed and arch enemies of one another. I think whilst there are 1,001 justifications that can be made to killing Fisk, if we're just talking about this, I think there is something to the notion that, you know, something or someone will just come and fill that space. To a greater extent, to a lesser extent, you don't know, but the risk is always that you run of opening up the door to someone worse. And you see that time and time again. You know, that you think the threat is dealt with, and then something else comes along that's an even greater threat. If you're talking tropes, that's very close to the beginning of the trope book. And also, I think, like with Daredevil and Fisk, because of how grounded and gritty and personal this show is, in a vacuum chamber devoid of every other media that you could reference to in a similar fashion, I do feel like the show does a very good job of making it clear that Kingpin and Daredevil understand each other. And I think that there is value there in then not killing Fisk for Matt, because yes, you are keeping an evil alive, not only to prevent a potentially greater evil from rearing its head, but also because of the constant clashing you have with this person, entity, whatever. You inherently comprehend and understand each other more, arguably become dependent on each other more. And therefore, I think that the relationship changes, whereby, yes, the person will still end up doing horrible things and things that you technically could have stopped if you killed them. But by proxy, I think that the villain knowing that the hero is there and will ultimately probably find some way to stop them is a dynamic back and forth that maybe keeps both more in check than they would otherwise. Like, I think that there is a mutual respect ultimately, even though neither would necessarily ever admit to that. I think that Fisk respects Daredevil. And I think that in some way, again, he would never admit it, Matt does respect Fisk and what he embodies. Because as with most villains, you kind of want to submit a compelling motive for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the motive for Fisk is a relatively altruistic one. Like he wants to make the district, the city better. It's just that, as with most villains, he is going about that motive the arguably complete wrong way. And is overcorrecting in a number of different, oversteering in a number of different aspects. So like Matt and Fisk share essentially the same motive. It's just that they are on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how they action upon that motive.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, and with the understanding and the clashing and the preventing of something worse coming in, there's an equilibrium found there, I think, that is, again, not unique to Daredevil, but executed as well in Daredevil as I've seen in anything else. So that would be my answer.
Okay, cool. Another thing that I kind of want to talk to you about is the use of the character. I think his name is Stick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just making sure I got that right. How did you feel about that character? Because he kind of threw me off. Like, I liked his character at first, but then the way that they left it, like when he left, kind of threw me off. I don't know. I think that confused me.
Yeah, I guess I understand that. I guess I hadn't ever really thought about it all that much, because he kind of just feels an archetypal, stereotypical role, of like the mentor that's overly critical.
He's filling the Gandalf role for sure, but like, I don't know. I think that like most of the time, people that fulfill that role like typically die.
That's true.
But he didn't die in this case. He fought with Matt and then just left to go be a super mysterious ninja somewhere else. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess maybe the sentiment was that they kind of wanted to, I guess, going against the archetypal thing, make him more of a antagonistic character.
Mm-hmm.
I think, that yes, there is usually the rub between the mentor and the tutee kind of characters in any story, because the mentor is jaded, has a different worldview and is angry and bitter about some person that wronged them and yada yada yada. But I think maybe the sentiment of him just sort of disappearing was to prevent the typical death kind of thing, or sacrifice at the last minute to save Daredevil when he's in a bad spot kind of thing. I think that they, and I don't know, I'm just speaking speculatively, that they maybe had intentions at the time to do more with his character,
maybe,
and have him be the more like, actually maybe one day almost going full villain against him, because it kind of just feels like, to varying degrees, almost any character in this series is kind of antagonistic to Matt, or at least Daredevil at one point or another. So I think that, like, to remain consistent in that, Stick is also like not really understanding at all, and is abrasive and dismissive, and doesn't stick around to help and see the final fight through and all of that stuff. So, but yeah, like I get, again, I hadn't really thought about it all that much, but it makes sense that it is a bit weird how he kind of walks in and then immediately walks back out almost.
Yeah, I just kind of like, like I said, it threw me off. I think that, like, I understand like preventing his death. I enjoyed what they did with the character of like he has different motivations and he thinks that Matt should follow what he says. Like I get that. That's kind of how like parental figures are sometimes. But like yeah, just like him disappearing, I was like, okay, I guess he's got other stuff to do. Sure. Last thing that I personally have that I can think of right now is talking about Wesley, because apparently we need to have a fight about this.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the character Wesley?
I mean, I'm consistent in my opinion. That he is, I think I called him an a-hole, because he is. And obviously, like, obviously, that goes without saying, that is being relatively reductive about his character, but I don't think it's deniable that that is ultimately what he is. Like, I know that there is nuance there and that he does show signs of not being completely cold-hearted and yada yada yada, but to me he never really filled anything other than that, again, stereotypical red right hand of the main villain role.
That's so interesting because I actually found his character to be one of the most compelling for me. I think that like part of it was that like it felt like the writing for his character, his dialogue was a lot less cheesy, I think.
I'd agree.
Like in part of it. I think that the actor also did like an incredible job of like playing that role well. So I think that those are two pieces of it. But like in general, I didn't ever think that like I wasn't like, oh, this guy's an asshole. Like I just like I think that I just found his character really interesting because he kind of works for this crazy guy. Obviously, in the way that Fisk acts, he has to know that he's crazy, right? But he continues to work for him. And I would also like, hold on. But on the flip side of that, I would argue, would he even be able to get away from Fisk? Because he is a very resourceful guy, but Fisk is also very resourceful. So, like, is he stuck in that role? Does he enjoy that role? Like, I don't know. Like, I felt like there were a lot of questions. And then he just suddenly died. And I was like, hey, there goes my favorite character. So, I don't know. I found his character really incredibly interesting, and I did not think he was an a-hole. However, I do think he did some not great stuff because he's a villain. But that's usually what villains do, from my understanding.
Typically, yeah.
Yeah. So what makes him more of a jerk than other villains?
Well, I mean, I don't know that he's more so than other villains. I just think that I don't know. I think it's relatively simple. Like, I don't want to rehash what I've said, but just that, in my opinion, I would agree, like you say, that the writing for him is arguably some of the more interesting, nuanced dialogue, because he is more cerebral and sophisticated, certainly, than Fisk is as a character. Arguably, at times, you could say he is almost the one really not pulling the strings, but controlling the direction of things. Yeah, he just seems like the slimy, conniving henchman. Henchman sounds reductive, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he feels like a dedicated man.
See, it sounds like you're coping for a very nasty man.
Listen, all I'm saying is that if I had somebody that would do anything for me like that, I'd probably be having a good time.
Well, yeah, but unless you're like someone like Karen, who he was going to kill.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So
but if he's doing what I want, he wouldn't be killing people.
Right. So basically what you're saying is yeah, the villains are good as long as they're doing the things for me.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I wouldn't ask somebody to do bad stuff.
But what if they're inclined to do bad stuff?
Well,
What if that's all they know?
then that wouldn't be what I was looking for, huh?
Well, then you're probably not looking for Wesley.
So you think that he's inherently evil versus just doing what Fisk says?
I mean, yeah,
Okay.
I don't. I know that the idea is that, again, Fisk has control over everything, and there is no real way out. You know, you see the dude early on in the series take his own life because he talked, right, and even just said Fisk's name.
That was a little dramatic.
But I mean, hey, would I rather do that than get
Have
my
your
head
smashed
crushed
in?
in a door? Maybe, you know, tough choice, obviously, but I compelling. Maybe I think about it at least.
I probably would have just gone and found a gun or something. You know, something
There
normal.
are easier ways, certainly, but you might as well go out with a bang. You know,
I
you might
guess.
as well make it a little bit impressive. Because we didn't see it, but I'm sure Matt afterwards was like, "Wow, that took some commitment. That took some doing. Fair play," and then a little clap.
Really, you think?
Yeah, I'd say so. Almost guaranteed. Yeah, I don't see. I personally, unless I'm misremembering, just didn't really see all that much in terms of redeeming stuff for Wesley. Whilst I admit that inherently there's going to be some degree of Fisk's shadow looming over him, and him then maybe being less inclined to break that relationship because of fear of ramification or being killed or whatever. But I just get the vibe from Wesley that there is a part of him, similarly to what we were saying about Matt enjoying beating the living daylights out of people. I feel like there is something about Wesley that kind of just likes the stuff, likes his job.
Mm-hmm.
And at times he takes pleasure in doing it. But in the set, if we're talking topical, Bree,
Okay.
in the same way that every week now we're hearing about a new game studio that closes down or layoffs that happen, you know, you become numb to it after a while. It's still sad. We're still like, for God's sake, but the shock isn't there anymore. I think that Wesley has been doing this for so long that it's just become a thing to him. You know, I think the stuff that he's doing, he's not even really processing the real extent of what he's doing anymore because it's just second nature. It's just his job, which isn't me trying to excuse it at all. In fact, quite the opposite. So yeah, I guess we'll just agree to disagree on Wesley.
I just think he's an interesting character. That's all.
Hey, I don't disagree with that sentiment. My argument has never been that he's not an interesting character. I just all I've ever said is that he's an a-hole, which he is. Never said he wasn't interesting.
Okay, well, that's all I had. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up in the show? Any other topics, themes, characters, through-line stories, stuff?
No, not really. I mean, you know, there's the little, as we kind of suggested, the little winks and nods to the MCU at large, very subtle references and talking about, you know, the Battle of New York and all of that. But nothing really of note. Again, it sort of, not that it feels forced, but that it's the closest thing in the show to feeling forced to me, because it's kind of like trying, that above anything else feels like it's trying to attach itself to something that it itself thinks is more successful than itself, which inherently it is because of the scale of the MCU even back at the time. But yeah, it felt not cringy or anything, but it's sort of like, oh yeah, okay, we're really trying to make sure that we're latched onto the side of this much bigger thing, aren't we?
Little
But-
barnacle.
Indeed. Got to do what you got to do. And
Yeah.
it panned out because Daredevil was by far the most beloved and successful of all of the Marvel Netflix shows. So,
Okay. Well, we now have our simplest and ranking list. I have nothing to add for my simplest. He did have a very nice butt, though.
that's fine. I thought the way you're speaking, you might have put Wesley on there. I was like, oh god.
No, no, I didn't think he was that attractive. I just thought he was like a really interesting character.
Okay.
I liked that he was a dedicated guy. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Ranking list. Where, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and get mine out of the way.
Okay.
I think, I'm kind of torn because I kind of want to put it like, I can't decide if I like What If better or not. Because it's like, what would you rather watch? And honestly, I'd rather watch almost anything on this list because it would be over faster than watching that season again.
Fair.
I will put it at 27 on my list. Which is below Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but above Captain America: First Avenger.
Okay.
Okay, Sam, where would you like to put yours on your list?
Put him on at number 17.
Number 17. So above Spider-Man: Homecoming?
Just above Homecoming, just below Black Widow.
Mm-hmm.
I could argue it going lower, and I could find ways to argue for it going higher. Not that much higher, but a little bit higher. But I think 17 is where I've settled after some probably longer deliberation than you think.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what will we be watching next?
That is a good question. One, I am not certain of the answer for.
Okay.
I'm speaking
well, we got
to fill time.
We got some options. We have a couple of movie trilogies to catch up on that we could watch. We could keep going in the MCU stuff.
Aha, yes. Okay. I'm making the decision live as this is happening.
Okay.
I'm going to say yes. I think I'm going to switch up the order slightly, but we will for next time be doing the Sam Raimi trilogy of Spider-Man films.
Okay.
All three.
All three in one episode.
Just knock them out. Easy peasy.
Okay.
That's the plan.
Okay. Nobody tell Taylor. He's going to be really excited. Okay, you guys. Well, that's what we'll be watching next. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us today. A special shout out to our current patrons. We have Pacaton, Fabulous Brianna, Brianna's mom, Brianna's brother, Lindsay, Nikolai at Night, Cypher Primus, Brendan Myers, Marcus O'Neill, Lillian, Mimi J, David Hotwright, Dave Harp, the Xbox Expansion Pass, and Lee Navarro, and Silicanet. Hold on. I hadn't added our new patron to this list yet. Where can people find you, Sam?
Anywhere and everywhere at Sam Heaney, Heaney.
You can find me at Fabulous Brianna, FabulistBreanna. You can find Save the Game Media at Save the Game Media for most places, except for Twitter/X, which is Save Game Media, because the handle was too long.
Gosh darn.
Yeah. What jerks. But I will see you guys in 2 weeks, and I hope you have a